What would happen if the fastest car of the season suddenly lost all its advantage right in the critical phase of the championship? McLaren has just discovered something in Oscar Piastri's car that not only jeopardizes its lead in the World Championship, but could change the fate of the 2025 title. This is what is really happening. Oscar Piastri and McLaren arrived at the Mexican Grand Prix in a position that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago, leading the Drivers' Championship and topping the Constructors' table with authority. From the outside, everything indicated that the British team had every technical and strategic detail under control. However, when the action on the track began during free practice, a mystery began to unfold that little by little was going to reveal a technical problem that was as unexpected as it was worrying. In the early stages of FP1, engineers began to notice inconsistencies in the performance data of the number 81 MCL39. Piastri's car did not generate the same downforce values as its twin driven by Lando Norris, despite theoretically having exactly the same base configuration. The difference was not dramatic at that point, but it was enough to generate internal concern. Already in FP2, the situation became alarming. The Australian finished outside the top 10, more than 8/10 behind the reference time set by Max Verstappen, and most disturbingly, even further away from his own teammate. As the telemetry analyses deepened, the engineers detected a series of anomalies related to the efficiency of the cooling system and the behavior of the aerodynamic flow in critical areas of the car, especially in high-load curves such as those in Sector 3 of the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. The Mexican track, located more than 2,200 meters above sea level, brutally exposes any deficiencies in the car's configuration. Air, being 25% less dense, drastically reduces naturally generated downforce, forcing teams to maximize their technical solutions. In this context, an incorrect configuration not only compromises performance, but directly sabotages the overall competitiveness of the car. Andrea Stella, team manager, was the first to confirm that something was wrong. According to his statements after qualifying, Piastri was losing between 1 and 2 milliseconds per corner compared to Norris, which over the course of a lap translated into a deficit of almost 6/10. This figure not only represents a world in competitive terms, but it represents a resounding fall for a driver who had been consistent, aggressive and dominant since the beginning of the season. The magnitude of the discovery was such that the team had to implement a complete review of the car's floor system and rear diffuser, fundamental areas for generating downforce in ground effect cars. McLaren has been working with an aggressive aerodynamic philosophy since mid-2024, so any alteration to the chassis heights or the behavior of the lower flows has enormous consequences on the balance of the car. And this is where the real dilemma arises. The data revealed that the efficiency of Piastri's car was not only compromised by a configuration issue, but that there was the possibility of an error in the assembly or calibration of some key structural components such as the floor or the lateral cooling system, which had not been detected in the factory or in the simulations. This, in modern Formula 1, is equivalent to letting a driver race with one hand tied behind his back. In short, the first great enigma of the Mexican GP was not carried out by Red Bull or Ferrari, but by a McLaren that, without warning, began to show cracks just when it was supposed to consolidate its hegemony. And most disturbing, the team did not know at the end of Saturday if the problem originated in Mexico, or if it had been dragged from Austin without knowing it. A total uncertainty that calls into question one of the key pillars of the project, its technical reliability. Lack of confidence in the simulation data led the team to operate blindly. Instead of refining their setup based on aggressive representative data, they ended up designing a car to survive, not attack. In Formula 1, these types of decisions often make the difference between a champion and a second place. Oscar Piastri was the direct victim of this strategy. Although Norris also suffered certain limitations, his more adaptive driving style, less dependent on the immediate rotation of the rear axle, allowed him to mitigate the effects. Instead, Piastri, who bases his aggressiveness on corner entry and a high minimum speed at the apex, found himself with a car that simply did not respond. The team attempted to adjust other parameters to compensate for the raised height. Modifications to the rear wing angle, adjustments to the engine maps to manage traction, and even a partial alteration to the suspension geometry. Nothing was enough. The problem was not in the car's accessories, but in its fundamental concept altered as a precaution. For a team that had just won the Constructors' title in 2024 and was leading the championship in 2025, this situation was a deep psychological blow. McLaren's aura of invulnerability was cracked by a tactical choice that, although rational from the regulations, was self-destructive from sporting logic. This act of technical self-censorship set off all the alarms within the paddock. Rivals like Red Bull and Ferrari took immediate notice. If McLaren began to lose confidence in its own car, in its ability to fine-tune without fear of sanctions, the championship could begin to tilt dangerously. Qualifying at the Mexican Grand Prix not only confirmed McLaren's worst fears, but also revealed what happens when a technically superior team betrays itself at the most critical moment of the season. As the Saturday sessions progressed, Oscar Piastri was trapped in a dynamic of chain errors, internal doubts, and a car unable to offer him the level of competitiveness that he had shown throughout the season. It all started in Q1, where Piastri radioed to report a failure in the DRS system during his first launched lap. The drag reduction system, vital in low air density circuits such as the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, was not activated correctly. This left him without top speed on the longest straights of the track, automatically placing him at a disadvantage of up to 7/10 compared to his teammate Lando Norris. Although the team resolved the problem quickly, the psychological damage was done. Piastri knew he had lost one of his strongest cards just when he needed it most. He managed to advance to Q2, but without full confidence in his car or his ability to extract the maximum in a single attempt. In that second session, Oscar was forced to do 2 timed laps to stay safe, something that is unusual for his profile as a solid qualifier. Only in his last attempt did he manage to set a time that placed him in 7th position, although still with a deficit of half a second compared to Norris. In today's Formula 1, where the differences between P1 and P10 can be less than a second, that type of margin is directly unacceptable for a driver who leads the World Championship. Already in Q3, with the 10 best drivers competing for pole, the contrast was devastating. Lando Norris got the best of the MCL 39 in optimal conditions and executed a sensational lap of 1 minute and 15.586 seconds, securing pole position with authority. Meanwhile, Piastri could only record a time of 1 minute and 16.174 seconds, finishing 8th. The difference between the two was 0.588 seconds, an eternity in qualifying terms and an implicit statement that something in his car or in his environment was not working as it should. But the real blow was not only in terms of time, but in the general context of the championship. At this point in the season, with only 5 races remaining, each position lost in qualifying has direct implications on the fight for the title. It's not just about points, it's about controlling race pace, avoiding traffic and dictating strategy from the front. Piastri, starting from the 4th row, was exposed to any incident at the start, to condition strategies and, above all, to the mental exhaustion of seeing his teammate and potential internal rival dominate with the same car as him. Furthermore, the fight for the championship is not only internal. Max Verstappen had been making up ground with victories in China and Japan, and Ferrari, with a resurgent Lewis Hamilton, was beginning to threaten regularly in the top 3. In this context, Piastri's 8th place was not a bad classification, it was an absolute alarm. If the most evolved car on the grid cannot perform under pressure, then the foundations of McLaren's lead are in danger. Most worrying of all, the team itself acknowledged that the problem could have originated earlier in Austin, and that it may not even have been fully diagnosed until after qualifying in Mexico. This introduces a dangerous component of uncertainty in the final stretch of the championship. How much data was contaminated by basic errors? How many future decisions will be made with erroneous information? And to what extent has Piastri lost confidence in the technical project that, until a week ago, seemed unbeatable? Thus, what should have been a confirmation of supremacy on Mexican soil ended up being a logistical, emotional, and technical nightmare for McLaren. And what's at stake isn't just a race. It's the possibility of the 2025 title changing hands due to a series of invisible but devastating mistakes. What happened in Mexico raises a fundamental question that every Formula 1 fan must ask. Can McLaren allow these types of mistakes when its first driver's title in more than 2 decades is within reach? Oscar Piastri has shown talent, consistency, and coolness to lead the championship against rivals of the caliber of Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and George Russell. However, no driver, no matter how brilliant, can overcome the technical uncertainty of a car that loses its way at critical moments. What do you think McLaren should do? Trust your technical concept even if it means taking risks again? Or prioritize reliability even at the cost of losing the competitive advantage that has brought them here? Leave me your answer in the comments. What do you think about all this?